As the war between Ukraine and Russia intensifies, it appears as though the Vladimir Putin regime is bringing in more Syrian fighters. To discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, according to sources within Syria, Russia was offering volunteers salaries ranging between $200 and $300 US to be security guards, in addition to recruiting mercenaries with wide privileges.
Yeah, so it's no surprise, right? This has been something we've watched throughout proxy wars in the Middle East, with Russia's involvement, of course, is to pay these, day fighters, mercenaries that are willing to come from all over the Middle East, whether it's Pakistan or Gaza and Syria and elsewhere, and they've done the dirty work. And we've seen this since the days of the Iranian Revolution back in 1979. So it's no surprise that Russia would say, well, I'm not going to bring in my A team into Ukraine. And that's what we've heard from sources up to now, that these are not Russia's best. And perhaps their failure to push forward is not just based on Ukraine's resistance, but also the fact that these are not the A-plus fighters that have gone in. So now Russia's thinking, well, I can recruit other fighters and pay them a low wage that would make them extremely happy compared to what they are getting back in the Middle East, and bring them into Ukraine. And based on internal documents, about 16,000 foreign fighters have given in their applications, and it said that these foreign fighters are coming from all over the Middle East. So we don't know if they're specifically from Syria. We don't have an exact count on the ones coming from Syria, but we do know that there is a serious recruitment process, and that makes sense, right? We're in the middle of this crazy civil war in Syria. We know that there are tons of mercenary fighters that are willing to go anywhere and fight for anything just to get a meal or just to get those few $100s. So it's a great place to recruit if you're Putin. So that's exactly what's going on. And remember, these are ruthless, brutal fighters from what we've seen throughout history, throughout the Middle East, and where they are sent to fight. So it's interesting to see Putin pull out all these different pages from all the different handbooks of the modern wars that we have seen, all in this little place, Ukraine.
Lisa, with many European nations banning Russian oil, a number of countries are now turning to other nations for their energy needs. Now, on your website, I noticed the top five were Iran, Saudi Arabia, China, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States, but no mention of Canada.
Yes, exactly right. Well, if the United States, cleans up its act regarding energy independence, if they decide to be energy independent, well, obviously Canada needs to be brought in on that conversation, and it's a no-brainer for many people. And as you know, this was a major topic during the presidential election, and Donald Trump wanted us to be energy independent. He saw that as, again, a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we want to be energy independent? Why would we want to rely on other nations, particularly rogue nations, to get our oil and to be in a predicament like we are in today? So the list that we have at the far end, that's the top five nations where European nations will turn to pick up this slack of oil, some good actors, some bad actors. So that's the issue here. Because of what's going on with Russia, of course, China's going to be brought back into the conversation. It's going to be very difficult to curb a nation like China when you have Russia turning to them for all sorts of resources and help, and for them to get even closer than they already are. We know that China has grown close to Afghanistan and the Taliban. We know that they've gone closer to Pakistan. We know that they're getting closer and closer to the Iranian regime, to Venezuela, and of course now to Russia. So this, particularly the topic of energy and oil and gas, it does bring in a lot of new players that we don't want. They're not new, but I'm talking about a lot of new relationships that we would have wanted to curb if this had not happened.
Some reports from the Financial Times and Washington Post say Russia has asked China for military equipment since its February 24th invasion of Ukraine. But Lisa, China could face consequences if it helps Russia evade sanctions over Ukraine.
Yes, well, that's what Jake Sullivan and National Security Advisors are saying. I love the Monday morning reports because you have all these threats that the American leadership has made going on the Sunday news shows here in the United States on the major cable and basic networks to say, there's going to be major consequences, there's going to be major sanctions, there's going to be major finger pointing, and guess what? Putin hasn't cared one iota about any of these threats. So the newest threat is, well, don't go to China. There will be major consequences. Well, today, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, is meeting with his Chinese counterpart in Rome in order to discuss whether or not, China should get involved and the consequences based on the United States' point of view, what they will be and why China should not get involved. So he will try to make that case. Like you said in the beginning of your prompt, yes, Russia has turned to China. And I think when people read this headline, they think Russia needs help with military stuff. They have such a big beefed up arsenal of everything you could want, right? Kid in a candy store when it comes to military equipment. But it looks like they are turning to China. Now, whether this is in fact a need for weapons, whether it's in fact a need for oil, whether it's in fact a need for a relationship, what they're doing is making this transaction ironclad. They're making this relationship stronger than ever. So by turning to China, they're saying there's going to be a lot of business because we're losing business from everywhere else in the world. So if they're cutting us off, whether it's American Express and Visa, whether it's Google and Instagram as of this morning, we will come to you to pick up the slack. So there's going to be a lot more where that came from. So there is going to be a push and pull between China, Russia, and the United States to see whose influence will win. And I think we will know more after today's meetings.
Russian missiles pounded a military base in western Ukraine over the weekend, tragically killing 35 people, Lisa. Now, many view the facility as a crucial hub for cooperation between Ukraine and the NATO countries supporting its defense. Now, the offensive is moving perilously closer to the Polish border, which could be a real issue because Poland obviously is a NATO nation.
Yes, and that's one of the things that everybody's waiting to see, the NATO angle here, to see whether or not Article 5 of NATO, which states if any nation within NATO is struck, that means the entire alliance gets involved. If Article 5 is invoked, then the United States has already said, Jake Sullivan actually said over the weekend, that we will protect every inch of NATO territory. That means by accident or on purpose, if any assets of NATO, any of these smaller countries, any of their assets, any of their bases are hit, then I think we will see the World War III unleashed. There will be an escalation of sorts, unless it's an empty threat, and that is much worse than anything else here. But we're really stuck in a bad situation. How the West is watching. Putin has the upper hand because we're watching, right? We're letting him take the next move and the next move and the next move, and meanwhile we keep threatening and saying one more step and that's it, one more step and that's it, and we're just waiting to see what Putin will do. Now, Putin, being the calculated statesman that he is, I've come to the point to say this doesn't even make sense anymore. The calculations just don't add up anymore. And I refuse to believe that he has lost his mind. I know a lot of people are saying, is he of sound mind? Yes, he is of sound mind. I think it is very dismissive and very dangerous to say that he has lost his mind and that these moves are just, his haphazard, knee-jerk reactions to anything. He knows exactly what he's doing. Now, the question becomes, what is the calculation? What is he getting other than just Ukraine? Because he's losing a lot more, right? So when you look at the pros and cons, there has to be more to this equation. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is just a talk about geopolitical strategy and how it has to make sense, right? If he is the calculated statesman that we know that he is, he will not withdraw without going further, meaning he will not give up, he will not surrender, he will not quit. If that is in fact the case, then what will be his next move? And if these threats, in fact, are not empty threats, then what will be the West's next move? There are a lot more questions than answers, Hal, right now. But like I said, the unfortunate part is that he does have the upper hand because we're standing by and watching what his next move will be here.
Lisa, we do know there are thousands of troops stationed in the Baltic states in Europe right now, American troops. So what would happen if Russian troops rolled into Poland, a NATO-protected country? Like you said, could we see World War III? Would those American troops be pulled into the fight right away?
Yeah, the American troops are actually stationed and more have been sent over to Poland. If you recall, once this did escalate, there were 11,000 troops that were sent over to Poland, and in addition to 5,000 that were already there, and an additional 500 have been sent over the last 10 days. So you do have a nice sizable, a force there, and more than anything, they would get there if they needed to get there, if they needed to invoke Article 5 of NATO in protecting a NATO nation. Now, Kamala Harris has gone over to Poland to in her way, confirm the relationship between NATO and the United States and Poland specifically, and the United States. And she was cracking up all over the podium, but she did say a friend in need is a friend indeed. So that's what we got out of it. There's a lot more to say about Kamala's trip to Poland, but there was the symbolism of sending the president of the United States over to Poland to say that we are in fact with you, we are united, and we have your back. That was exactly what I guess the point of the trip was, and in not so many words, that was what was portrayed. So I do believe that this will escalate if it does reach Poland, and unfortunately, we are inching closer and closer west. We're going in that direction. So I think the next 48 hours will be crucial to see how this goes.
Now, Russia, in its invasion of Ukraine, has also been taking some prisoners. Lisa, there are reports now that Russian forces have abducted a second Ukrainian mayor.
Yes, it's interesting how they are fixated on these local leaders. It seems as though the Ukrainians have been able to form these resistances and these pockets of resistance within their localities. And because of that, they are thinking, well, if we focus on the local leadership, we take them out, the Ukrainians will have a harder time, gathering, uniting, having that patriotism, having that, rallying around the flag. So this is the second time a mayor has been abducted. We've been told by Zelensky. Zelensky is in Ukraine, and that is the most incredible aspect of all of this. That he has not run away, he has not shied away or backed down. But what he has done is use diplomacy to reach out to the West to say, we need more help, we need you. He has now scheduled a call with members of Congress in order to make another plea, to make his case, to say that we need more help. Look, as much as the United States believes they're doing their part, I think on the part of the Ukrainians, we could be doing a lot more, and they do need the West to do a lot more, including no-fly zones, that's what they will probably be pushing for. That and some aerial support, whether they get jets or aerial support in no-fly zones, or U.S. involvement, which I know a lot of people are against here. Obviously, any escalation is nothing to be taken lightly. So, a lot of calculations, a lot of nuance, and a lot of moving parts here on this Monday.
Iran attacked Iraq's northern city of Erbil over the weekend with a dozen ballistic missiles, Lisa. Many view this attack of the autonomous Kurdish region as an attack on the United States and its allies. Can you explain why?
Yes. Well, let's start with the most obvious. The elephant in the room, as we like to say, is that we are at the negotiating table with the Iran regime. And maybe hours from now, if not days from now, there will be an Iran deal that will be announced. And that will free up billions of dollars. It will take the Iran regime's worst, most egregious, brutal terrorists off the terror list. It will take sanctions off of them and again, release more money so that they can go out and do their terror games all over again. Now, why are we doing this? I don't know. Now, to add insult to injury, the Iranian regime is going around and shooting at our assets, shooting at our bases, shooting at our allies in the region. This is the Kurdish autonomous region of Erbil. And it is, in fact, an area where obviously U.S. bases were housed, and a very symbolic hit at the United States and at Israel. So this was not an accident. This is not something, and they took responsibility for it. They're extremely proud. They're flexing their muscles this morning, and it continues. All of this bad behavior continues. Now, we have talked about the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which is acronymed as the JCPOA, as the Obama era 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Now, the only difference between then and now is that at least then, as bad as that deal was, and it was very bad, the Iran regime felt as though they had to at least pretend or at least put on an airs about having some sort of reformed behavior, regarding terror and regarding human rights abuses and regarding their just rhetoric at the negotiating table. Now things are very different. They feel as though they can get away literally with murder. They can get away with, supporting terror, shooting at our assets. They have blood on their hands. They have the most brutal, they call him the butcher, president, right, you see in office, and they continue. And guess what? We are still pining for a deal. So nothing has changed there. But Hal, if we start connecting the dots on the foreign policy here, it's abysmal. And, world leaders, particularly the rogue ones, particularly the dictators and the tyrants, they notice. They notice when there's a weak leadership here in the White House in the United States, and they take advantage. And it's no coincidence that we have all these global, crises going on at the moment.
Lisa, Libya's former Interior Minister Fathi Bashaga was recently sworn in as his country's new premier as a step in what many are viewing as a move towards rebuilding their embattled nation. What do we know about this guy, Bashaga?
Yeah, this is a great move if he can unite the nation. And you have to remember, Libya is a very difficult nation to unite, and that's why we have seen over 10 years of civil war. We have seen, what maybe started out as an Arab Spring turn into this nightmare of tribalism and intersectional and fighting and all these insurgencies coming up and trying to defeat one another. With the removal of Gaddafi, you thought things would be just peachy, but that is a very Western view of things. At least Gaddafi was able to be the one glue, the one head of state. Even though there was still tribalism under Gaddafi, it was more of a cultural tribalism that rather than a political one. Now we see, the worst kind of divide between different factions there on the ground. And of course, you have different nations in there. You have different sectors in there. You have different terror organizations in there. But this guy has been part of the parliament for a while. He has a lot of experience, and he's trying to unite and put away all sorts of violence. And that has been his mantra, to not use any violence, but to unite the nation and to say, let's look forward, let's have a future, and let's build this nation. And we wish them well. I hope that this is a place where we can give them support and the support that they need so that they can build the nation in their way and not import any of the Western lens of so-called democracy that we believe in, but what they need for their future.
Remains to see how his leadership plays out. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.